Judges Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com. Support our show by visiting both websites. Now it's time for Judges Corner with David Green.
Hi, and welcome to Judges Corner. My name is David Green. I'm a level 2 judge from Orlando, Florida, and today we're going to look at the mechanics of Gatecrash. I know last week we said we'd look at Planeswalkers, but today we have a great opportunity to look at all 5 abilities. So let's take a look at those abilities now. So first we have Extort, the black and white mechanic in the Orzhov Guild. Cipher, the blue and black mechanic in the Dimir Guild. Bloodrush, the red and green mechanic in the Gruul Guild. Battalion, the red and white mechanic in the Boros Guild. And Evolve, the Simic mechanic in the green and blue guild. So let's take a look at our first mechanic, Extort. Extort means whenever you cast a spell, you may pay a black or a white. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. So what that means is, whenever I cast a spell, for each permanent I have with Extort, it's going to trigger. And before that spell resolves, each of those triggers will go on the stack, and I'll have an option of paying when they go to resolve 1 black or 1 white mana. And for every black or white mana I pay, my opponent's going to lose 1 life and I'm going to gain 1 life for each individual Extort trigger. So let's take a look at our first example with Extort. So in this example, you have 3 Syndicate of Tithes on the battlefield, and you cast Alms Beast. You'll trigger Extort 3 times and then have the option to pay black or white mana 3 times in order to gain a maximum of 3 life and have your opponent lose 3 life. Of course, you can pay less than that, and you can even choose to pay nothing if you'd like, but you can't pay more than for each individual Extort trigger that you have out. So let's look at some interactions of Extort. For example, if you cast a spell and your opponent wants to counter it, you can still get the Extort triggers even though the spell is countered. And if your opponent casts a spell and you want to counter it, you can wait to see if they're going to pay the Extort triggers or not before you decide to counter it. So let's take a look at another example. In this example, we're playing a multiplayer game against 3 opponents, and I have 1 permanent with Extort. When I go to cast a spell and pay for the Extort trigger, each of my opponents are going to lose 1 life, but I'm going to end up gaining 3 life instead. That's because each of my opponents lost 1 life, and I'm going to gain a life for each life my opponents lost. So that pretty much summarizes Extort. With that, let's take a look at our next mechanic, Cipher. So, Cipher says, you may exile the spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of this card without paying its mana cost. So, Cipher is actually a pretty complex mechanic. What it means is, whenever you play this spell with Cipher, before it finishes resolving after you've gotten the effect on the card, you can choose to exile it and encode it on one of your creatures. And then that encoded creature, whenever it deals combat damage to your opponent, will get you 1 free copy of that spell right then and there. And it'll continue to get a free copy every single time it deals damage successfully. You don't have to get the copy if you don't want to, but it's a free copy. So with that, let's take a look at our first example. So in this example, we're going to be encoding our animated Dimir key rune with Whispering Madness. And then we're going to attack with the key rune in order to get the free copy of the spell. But then you might ask, what'll happen to that encode spell when I end my turn and the key rune stops being a creature? Well, the key rune's still going to be encoded, and if you ever animate it again, you're going to be able to get another free copy of that spell when you attack and deal damage again. And as long as it remains on the battlefield, and as long as the encoded spell remains exiled, you're going to still leave it encoded for as long as you want. You could even encode it again and again, and then get multiple triggers of the encode when you attack. And that's true for anything that you encode. So this example is great because it shows a couple of things. We can encode things, and if they stop becoming creatures, they're still encoded. Also, we can encode things after we play the spell, attack, and get the copy right away. And we can encode things with multiple encode spells and get multiple encoded triggers each time they deal damage successfully. So we're almost done with Cipher, but before we move on, I want to take a look at a few other things. For example, if you have a creature encoded with Cipher and I take control of it and attack you with it, I get the free copy. Another example is, if a copy is put on the stack, but a Thalia is in play, you still have to pay 1 for it. And lastly, if a Snapcaster Mage is played, targeting a card with Cipher in the graveyard, you can still play it and encode it on one of your creatures because it won't matter that it's going to the exile by flashback, because it's going to the exile anyways. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our next mechanic, Bloodrush. So Bloodrush is an ability that means you pay the cost and discard this card in order to give target attacking creature this card's power and toughness in addition to its own, along with any keyworded abilities on that card. So Blood Rush is really cut and dry. It can only really be activated between this narrow window between when you attack and before the complete end of your combat phase. So let's take a look at an example of how it works. So here we're attacking with a Burning Tree Emissary, and our opponent thought they could get away with blocking it with a 3/3. Little did they know, we have a Vashino Skanktail in our hand, and we're going to discard it to give our Burning Tree +3, +1, and first strike, making it a 5/3 and able to joust with their creature before they ever have a chance to touch us. So one really neat thing about Blood Rush is it's an activated ability, so it can't be countered by things like cancel because it's not actually a spell. So with that, we're going to move on over to Battalion and take a look at what Boros has in store for us. Battalion means whenever this creature and at least 2 other creatures attack, you get the ability on the card. So what Battalion basically means is whenever I attack with this creature with Battalion and at least 2 other creatures, although it could be more if you'd like, you get the ability on the card. So let's take a look at one of those abilities in our next example. When Boros Elite and 2 soldier tokens attack, the Battalion trigger will go off, and Boros Elite will end up getting +2/+2 until the end of the turn. Or how about when we attack with 3 Boros Elites? Each of them will trigger off of each other, and will end up attacking your opponent for a combined total of 9 damage. So we're almost done with Battalion. I just want to cover a few more things before we move on. For example, if I have a couple of creatures that are going to attack and a few of them have Battalion, and you want to stop all of it, you need to stop me from attacking with my creatures, or at least everyone but 2 of them, before I decide to declare my attack. If you can't, you're not going to be able to stop Battalion from triggering. And once they've attacked, their triggers have already gone on the stack, so removing the creatures won't remove the Battalion effects. So with that, let's move on and see what the Simic has to offer. Evolve means whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has a greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So there's a very particular thing I want to cover with Evolve, and that's called the intervening if clause. What that means is, when this trigger goes off, if the condition is true, put the trigger on the stack. If it's not true, don't do anything with it. And then, when this trigger would resolve, check to see if the condition is still true. If it's true, resolve the trigger. If it's not true, don't do anything at all. So, that really matters when multiple creatures enter the battlefield all at the same time. So let's take a look at that in our first example. So in this example, we have a Cloudfin Raptor, and it has a +1/+1 counter on it. Then we play Call of the Conclave, producing a 3/3. That'll cause our Cloudfin Raptor to evolve, and get another +1/+1 counter. Then, if we play Courser's Accord, we'll get 2 more 3/3s, triggering our Raptor twice. When the first trigger goes to resolve, our Raptor will get +1/+1 and become a 3/4. But then the second trigger won't resolve, because it's already met its evolutionary standards. So before we move away from Evolve, I want to hit one last thing, and that's the Power or Toughness clause. What I mean by that is, if you play a creature with a greater power but a weaker toughness, you can evolve off of the power. And inversely, if it's a greater toughness, you can evolve off of that too. Just use whatever fits your evolutionary needs. So with that, I hope all of this information has been really helpful. Hopefully it'll come in handy at your local game days or pre-releases. And we haven't really worked out the details yet, but we're going to have a Q&A segment at the end of each of our episodes. More details are going to follow soon. And I'm really sorry we didn't do Planeswalkers. I'm really looking forward to it, so expect Planeswalkers for our next episode. And with that, choose your guilds wisely, and by that I mean pick the Gruul, and have fun.